Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so I want to try something different in this video, right? I want to try something new. I want to try something unique. I want to cover the first issue of DC 1 Million, and I want to see if you guys are interested in this, right? This is one of those stories where I only really cover it if you guys care, right? If you guys don't really care, I probably wouldn't really worry about it too much, but people have been asking me for it. And so I'm curious if it's one of those things where it's like a ton of people really want to see it, or if people who are saying like everybody wants to see this story, if it's only really just a couple people who actually want to see it. I'm kind of curious, right? So this is strictly for you guys. But DC 1 Million was really the first major crossover following the reformation of the JLA, right? The Justice League of America. The Justice League of America was like the second major superhero team in comic books, right? The first one was the JSA, back during the Golden Age. It was the first real collaboration between National Allied Publications and All American Comics, right? But introducing the JLA was kind of like the top characters at the time from DC Comics coming together on a singular team. Batman and Superman weren't there all the time because DC didn't want to oversaturate the market with their characters. But for what we saw, it was exceedingly interesting, right? Because when Crisis on Infinite Earths happened in 1985, the JLA basically went away, right? DC replaced it with Justice League International, right? And then we got Justice League Europe, that kind of a thing. In 1998, after the British invasion, that's when Grant Morrison brought back the Justice League of America team in its self-titled series, JLA. And so DC 1 Million was one of the first major crossovers that happened as a result of that, right? And so what this does is this initially picks up with a guy by the name of Zariel. Now, Zariel is a character that we're going to see off and on throughout the story, but Zariel's really here because one, he was a Grant Morrison creation, and two, because he's actually a pretty interesting character. So the way this played out is that Zariel was introduced to humanity more or less as a guy who would like guard women and different things like that. You know, kind of a guardian angel of sorts created by the Presence. He had his own storyline where he had his arch nemesis, which Grant Morrison actually used to establish the idea that the Presence is not like a singular being who exists out there, but the Presence is everything and everywhere, more or less is what it is. And so because of that, whenever you see the Presence in DC Comics, assuming that you follow Grant Morrison's ideology as opposed to what we've seen in like Vertigo, that when the Presence appears, it's almost like eternity from Marvel, right? Like the coalescence of the entirety of existence given form in a singular being. This eventually led to the combined efforts of the JLA and Zariel basically defeating Zariel's nemesis, and then he was invited to join the team, which ultimately he did. But what it also deals with here is this idea that at some point a message is sent out by John Jones, by the Martian Manhunter, essentially saying that like over 1 million people are dead, this is our last message, John Jones out. Basically meaning whatever it is that happened popped off, right? Like 1 million people died, that's no small thing. But what we end up doing here is basically jumping back to what's called the first day, essentially the present day more or less, or when it all kind of kicked off. And what this does is it sort of picks up after the JLA of the 853rd century had shown up here. Now technically they're called Justice Legion A is what they're referred to, and we'll find out why they're called Justice Legion A. But they had made sporadic appearances over the course of the JLA comics up to this point, right? So this is not their first introduction. They date all the way back to I think JLA number 6, number 12, and then 23, when we saw like several appearances of their characters popping up. We didn't really know what the basis was behind it. We didn't really know why they were there. It's all kind of coming to bear in this particular story, hence the reason why we didn't really cover any of those older one-shots, right? They were just kind of there. But what this means is that Superman and Wonder Woman and Martian Manhunter and Wally West and all these guys are all basically saying like, hey, you know, these guys are our counterparts from the future. Now, something else that I want to point out here is that this group is also joined by the arrival of a woman by the name of Huntress. Now, there have been several characters to play the role of Huntress in DC Comics. The first one was Helena Wayne, and she originally appeared back in 1977 in DC Superstars number 17. Ultimately, because of the fact that Crisis on Infinite Earths basically removed the idea of the multiverse, and because of the fact that the original Helena Wayne was the daughter of Catwoman and Bruce Wayne from an alternate universe from Earth 2, they couldn't really use an alternate reality counterpart to her character because after Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, there were no alternate realities. And so under Joe Cavalieri, she was basically rebooted in her entirety, and she was introduced as a woman named Helena Bertinelli. She is the daughter of Maria Bertinelli. But anyway, she was basically rewritten as that character to kind of be a little more in line with her original origins. But you've also got a couple familiar faces here, right? You've got John Henry Irons as Steel. He was a member of the JLA that basically stayed on after the events of the death and return of Superman. You've also got Kyle Rayner, who's currently the Green Lantern. Of course, a lot of you guys know that following the events of Emerald Twilight. But what you basically have is this 853rd century version of the Justice League of America, and for the most part, it's kind of interesting the way they function, right? Because the JLA does not immediately trust them right off the bat, right? This group shows up, hey guys, we're you, like we're your counterparts from like the 853rd century. You have to believe us. And it's not like they're kind of like, okay, cool, bro, like awesome, good to have you aboard. Because one of the things they talk about is how the technology and the various weapons and resources and things like that that are available to the JLA are something that's coveted by a lot of people who are out there, right? And a lot of people will do whatever they can in order to get in there and take a lot of those resources, right? These weapons could lay waste to entire cities and even lay waste to the Justice League themselves. And so as a result of this, they kind of put them through these sort of mental scans, right? To verify their authenticity, to make sure these guys are legit. And they are, right? They kind of come back and basically reveal, yeah, these guys are okay. Everything's on the up and up. Wally West basically vouches for the Speedster from his time period. Kind of a funny thing. The Speedster, as he exists now, this version of the Flash is not actually from the 853rd century. Instead, he's from the 27th century, I think it is, and then was actually time displaced in the 853rd century and then stayed there. But what you end up having is this, essentially this revelation that in the 853rd century, the legacy of the Justice League of America has lasted that long. But the notion that in this future time period, the legacy still lives on really comes to fruition in a lot of different ways, right? What's happened here is that in this time period, the entirety of our solar system has been completely colonized, right? It's been rebuilt and it's been totally colonized. Humans are living on various planets around the solar system. And it's one of these things where humanity and really society as a whole seems to have reached this kind of golden age, right? This age of enlightenment and exploration. And so because that, things are infinitely better. Now, it wasn't without its struggles, right? That what there was at some point in time is there was a being by the name of Solaris, right? Who was essentially a super intelligent supercomputer that was powered by proton fusion processors is how they explain it. But essentially he's been repurposed into a second sun. And the reason why is because somewhere along the line, the Superman of the 505th century actually died, reversing the programming of Solaris. And then in turn, having Solaris basically orbit is kind of a protective system as well as a second sun for the solar system. And so with that being the case, humanity's kind of gone on to experience this era of exploration, this era of technology and science. But one of the cool things to come out of this is what's referred to as the Superman dynasty, in the sense that you have this kind of legacy where Superman had, presumably all these different offspring. But the dynasty really points to the idea that Superman really is the greatest of all the superheroes. So the whole reason why the Justice Legion is here, and that was kind of the big question the JLA had, right? Like, it's one thing for us to verify you're here from the 853rd century. It's another for us to know why. And their response is because Superman Prime is coming back, right? The Prime Superman is making his return, that he had essentially kind of traveled around the cosmos. We don't really know what he did, but he traveled around the cosmos. Then he eventually came back and settled in the sun. He's been there ever since, and now he's leaving the sun, and he's basically coming back to Earth. This is a huge time of celebration, and that's really what this is. It's supposed to be a gigantic celebration for the return of Superman Prime. And that's kind of what blows Superman away in the present day, because it's him. And that's kind of what knocks his socks off. He's like, wait, you're telling me that I'm alive in the year 85,271 and like I'm in the sun and I'm coming back? It's kind of a shocker for a couple different reasons. One, because he gets this revelation that he's alive in that time period. And two, it's kind of sad because what it means is he's outlived everyone he cares about multiple lifetimes over and over again. But following this, what we do is we switch over to Oracle. Now, this is one of those moments in DC Comics, and we talked about this when we covered the various members of the Bat family. This is one of those eras in DC Comics when a lot of people loved Batgirl the most, right? Well, not really Batgirl, but Barbara Gordon. They loved her the most. And the reason why is because after Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, when she was paralyzed, while that story was not originally in continuity, eventually it was made to be in continuity. And so with Barbara Gordon basically being paralyzed, kind of going forward from there, a lot of the questions that people had is, what's DC going to do with her character? And what they did is they totally reworked her and made her kind of like this information hub for not only just the members of the Bat family, but also like the Justice League and various other people out there who all would kind of go to her and say, I need information. I need somebody to tap into these back channels and get me info on this and info on that and that kind of a thing. And so as a result, she became an exceedingly cool character. The other part of this is that Arsenal is trying to reform the Titans. Now we'll talk about why that matters here in a second. But at the moment, you've essentially got Nightwing kind of carrying on this mantle and doing his patrol. But you've got some cool little references, right? Some cool little moments. But what we end up doing here is basically jumping back to the JLA, having this conversation with the Justice Legion A, and then basically learning that like representatives from all the worlds across the Sol system are all going to be there to pay tribute. Multiple Supermen and Superwomen from across the entirety of existence, right? Like the Justice Legionnaires from like the very far-flung future. All these people are going to be here to witness the return of Superman Prime. So again, this is a huge deal. And so from there, it's really kind of a question of, is anybody going to go, right? Like who's going to attend? attend this, who's going to be there. And for a lot of these folks, it's kind of like, this is cool, right? Because there's going to be these kind of gladiatorial games, you know, different things along those lines in these kind of arenas. This really like appeals to Aquaman, you know, he's kind of like, yeah, like I'm down with that, you know, and Wonder Woman in a lot of the same way. But all in all, everybody's on board with this, right? You know, like Kyle Rayner and Superman, Wonder Woman, everybody's basically on board. The only person who we haven't really heard from here is Batman, is Bruce Wayne. And of course, Helena Wayne's the one that shows up to kind of drop some of these tidbits of information. But of course, as usual, Batman's already, for the most part, kind of aware. But it's one of these cool things because Batman's kind of been dismissive of Huntress. And a lot of the reason is because of the fact that like he doesn't really like her methods. But at the same time, she's also pretty effective at what she does. And so it's better to have her there than to like have her out there doing whatever and things kind of being all over the place. But one of the funny situations about this is that Batman's like, you can't really treat everybody like they're an enemy, like they're inherently bad people. But the response of Huntress is, but they usually are. She's really kind of distrustful, doesn't really believe in any kind of like goodness in people. But one of the things that happens is when he shows up in the Batcave, he's immediately met by the arrival of Batman from the 853rd century. Now, we don't really know much about this guy at this point in time. And even Batman himself kind of asked a few questions and he's kind of like, why did you choose the bat? And the response of Batman 1 million is, I'll tell you at some future point in time. But what he basically says is, you have to go. You have to attend this thing. Bruce Wayne doesn't really want to go, right? It's not really in his interest to go there because he's kind of like, I care about what's going on right now. I don't care about what's going on in some far-flung future. The result of this is that, you know, Batman 1 million basically takes him. He launches a kind of attack that hits both physically and telepathically. And he basically says, by the time you realize this sentence is going on for far too long, you'll realize that Huntress was right. This is all going to be over and it's all going to be done. And then you're going to be with me. So literally, he just seems to take the essence of Batman with him, a spirit in a bottle in quite a literal sense. And then that's basically it. From there, we learn a few other things, right? We basically learned that there were like these coral cities and underwater pirate kingdoms on Neptune, that the women of the Themyscira had colonized Venus, you know, in the 800th century. So like, these are the kind of things that sort of drive them there. It's one thing to know that Superman Prime is coming back and it's cool to be part of that celebration, but it's also kind of piqued their interest in terms of like, what's this future like? Like, what kind of things are there? You kind of get this cool moment where Wonder Woman basically reveals her invisible jet, which is a really good return for a lot of people who were really kind of nostalgic for an era of comics that they were not a part of, which happens, right? You know, we as comic book fans, we think about eras like the 1940s or the 1950s in comics, and we were never really a part of it. I mean, some of us were, but most of us, like 99% of us, were not, but we're still kind of nostalgic for that era. For a lot of fans who had seen like the return of Wonder Woman's invisible jet post-crisis, a lot of people liked that, right? It was a way to kind of recapture that old school, you know, those old school comics and just kind of go from there. And so following that, you basically have the entirety of the Justice League who basically assemble alongside the Justice Legion A for the purpose, of course, meeting at Mount Rushmore and then beginning the process of being sent to the future, right? That it's not something they don't just like snap their fingers and go. That you've got to kind of manipulate the time stream to a degree. You got to be careful. You got to make sure you send them back and they don't end up inside of like a giant cinder, you know, a brick wall or something along those lines. So like, you can't just arbitrarily send them, right? You got to make sure that everything's in order and everything's lined up. But what we end up doing here is we end up switching over to Mongolia. And the reason why is here in northern Mongolia, there's basically kind of a weapons system or weapons event that's going down. But what you have here is you have Arsenal, you have Tempest, and you have Supergirl. And this is basically kind of the reformation of the Titans. Now, one of the things that I held off mentioning here is that Huntress was designed to be a replacement for Oliver Queen. And the reason why is Oliver Queen was killed in 1995, I think it was, in Green Arrow issue number 101, right? So he had been removed. Now, ultimately, he was brought back in 2001, 2002 in Green Arrow Quivers, but at the moment, he's basically dead. And so what it did is it really kind of came down to Arsenal sort of picking up the mantle of Oliver Queen and continuing on, albeit trying to reform the Teen Titans and basically going from there. That's why you see Tempest here. That's why you see Supergirl is being a part of this. But the person that we also see here that's arriving on the scene is Vandal Savage. Now, Vandal Savage is here because what's happening is there's these rocket red suits that are being auctioned off. Now, the idea of the rocket red suits was originally introduced in 1987 as part of the Green Lantern comics, so they're post-crisis. And if I'm a betting man, I would say they were kind of in some ways DC's answer to like Iron Man, because what it did is it allowed individuals to enter the suit and then in turn basically have like, you know, invulnerability and the ability to fly, to shoot like these super powerful energy blasts, different things like that. A lot of it really seemed to be based on Iron Man tech, but in some ways, you know, it's also based on concepts that existed before Marvel really became a major thing, right? Like old school DC characters, and plus existing DC characters, right? Red Tornado, stuff like that. So these suits were modeled after a few different concepts, but 4 of them are currently being auctioned off because if they're taken by these nefarious individuals, they could be used for a variety of different purposes. But Vandal Savage basically shows up here and essentially states he's willing to pay $3 billion in order to buy all 4 of these things, which is a huge sum of cash. Now, for those of you guys who know, Vandal Savage is exceedingly old. He's immortal. He's been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? And so because of that, he's one of these guys that has the resources to pull it off, but it's also some, part of some nefarious plan that he has. And the reason for that is because ever since his introduction, with Vandal Savage's age, he never creates any kind of schemes or plans that will come to fruition in like a matter of weeks or months, right? That never happens. Vandal Savage plans for decades and centuries because he knows he's immortal. So he'll start the seeds of a plan today that won't come to fruition until like 4,000 years from now. His longevity allows him to become this kind of chess grandmaster in like the game of strategic, social, and political warfare on a regular basis, right? It makes him exceedingly capable. And so knowing that Vandal Savage is here, he's a guy who's basically a Justice League level threat that the Titans are trying to face off against. And a lot of this is because Roy Harper, Arsenal kind of wants to prove that he's just as capable as Green Arrow, but that the Titans can be just as capable as the JLA, which is going to be kind of a major problem they're going to run into, because as soon as that happens, of course, you have the arrival of Jesse Quick. Now, Jesse Quick was introduced in the Justice Society of America Volume 2 in 1992 in the first issue. And the reason why is because, again, because the JSA was an alternate reality version of the Justice League before the Justice League, what it meant was that post-crisis, because there was no more multiverse, you couldn't have a JSA from a different reality. And so what this meant is DC came back and basically reworked their origin and established the idea that the JSA was essentially a superhero team that existed during World War II, right? And so what this did is it allowed for the introduction of Jesse Chambers, or Jesse Quick, as a character who was the daughter of Johnny Quick. And Johnny Quick was one of the speedsters back before Crisis on Infinite Earths and post-Crisis who used a mathematical formula to achieve super speed. The difference here is that where Barry Allen was doused by chemicals and struck by lightning, Wally West went through the same thing. Max Mercury got his powers from a Native American shaman. That with Johnny Chambers and these guys and his daughter Jesse Quick basically saying a mathematical proof, these were all completely separate methods of achieving super speed. It wasn't until the introduction of the Speed Force in Mark Waid's Terminal Velocity that we basically learned they were all tapping into the Speed Force, right? That's how they all managed to gain access to it. But nonetheless, that's why she's able to do what she does. She's not the fastest speedster there ever was, but with a lack of Barry Allen, with Wally West currently on the JLA, it does present the opportunity for them to have someone with super speed on their side, which is really an invaluable asset in the realm of the superhero and supervillain community. And the issue with this is that for all the pomp and circumstance of having a speedster on their team, Jesse Quick is still pretty inexperienced, but she's also dealing with a guy who's been around for an exceedingly long time and who knows almost everything there is to know about speedsters. And so essentially, he picked up immediately on the fact that the Titans are here, that Roy Harper and his guys are here, just by, of course, having his scouts monitoring things and so on and so forth. But he's also developed a way to essentially overcome speedsters. Now, Supergirl is currently here as well as somebody who essentially infiltrated the group of Vandal Savage, which he allowed her to do. Of course, Supergirl only being a temporary member of the team at the moment. But what happens here is that as soon as the Titans launch their attack, the Vandal Savage invented a device, or has a device, that basically emits a signal that is not really able to be heard by the average person. But for a person traveling at super speed, it's absolutely devastating, right? And so that immediately takes out Jesse Quick. From there, you've got Roy Harper, who fires a neural scrambler arrow, which Vandal Savage catches and then throws at Supergirl and takes her out. That's how this all goes down. Each one of these guys are systematically taken out by Vandal Savage, one after another, after another, after another. That's what makes him so dangerous. He's a one-man wrecking crew. He's just so capable and he's so experienced. And so because of that, with basically all the different members of the team being taken out, they're all essentially put inside of these rocket red suits, more or less to seemingly be controlled by Vandal Savage or to carry out whatever his mission happens to be. And so what this does is it leads to the JLA totally unaware of all this that's going on, essentially being sent to the future by the Justice Legion A, right? Jumping back to this group right here. Once they're sent to the future, they arrive seemingly to where they believe they're supposed to be, or at least that seems to be the case. The issue with this is that the Justice Legion A is supposed to travel there as well. As soon as that's supposed to happen, our man, who's the one that's enabling this whole process, is completely completely and totally corrupted. And literally he just kind of breaks down and then collapses, right? And so what this means is that the JLA of the present day is stuck in the 853rd century and the Justice Legion A is stuck in the modern day. And so kind of, jumping to the 853rd century, we end up finding out that all of this has been orchestrated by Vandal Savage. And this is why I say this is the nature of Vandal Savage. It's 85,000 years into the future and he's still alive. And he looks like he's only really aged by maybe 20 years, right? So it's kind of weird. You would expect him to be the same age forever. Either that or he decided to grow his hair out and give himself some white streaks, which is kind of cool because he looks pretty awesome. He just looks menacing, man. Like if I saw somebody like that walking down the street, I'd probably think one of two things. Either that guy's a pimp or that guy's like the most dangerous person in the world, right? Just like some criminal mastermind. But nonetheless, we end up finding out that the Solaris sun has essentially seemed to have kind of gone back to its programming of being a villain, right? It didn't take too kindly to being reprogrammed by Superman from the 505th century. And so essentially Solaris alongside Vandal Savage are working together to essentially ensure that when Superman Prime shows up, that he has to watch his counterparts die from the modern day, right? That's kind of their grand scheme, is to destroy the JLA. Now, we are going to see a litany of things take place besides this, and there's a lot more going on between, with regards to Solaris and Vandal Savage behind the scenes. But let me know if you guys want to see more of this, right? Let me know if you guys want to see more of this DC 1 million. I'm kind of curious, but if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Now we'll catch you all later. Peace.